welcome. Before we begin tonight's journey, take a moment to settle into stillness. Notice where you are listening from. Perhaps you are at home, lying in bed, or perhaps in a quiet space somewhere else. What time is it where you are? Is it deep into the night, the hours stretching silently before dawn? Or is it evening, the last of the day's light fading into rest? Wherever you are, and whatever the hour, this time belongs to you. Tonight, we step into a world of grandeur and unease, of glittering courts and hidden burdens. The French monarchy, and most vividly, the Palace of Versailles. When we think of Versailles, we imagine golden halls, shimmering mirrors, gardens stretching endlessly, and the rustle of silks as courtiers bow before their king. But beneath the beauty, beneath the pageantry, lay a life that was rigid, exhausting, and filled with constant scrutiny. It was a world that dazzled the eye, but demanded endless sacrifice from those within it. Imagine yourself approaching Versailles in the 17th century. The palace rises before you, vast and symmetrical, its stone walls glowing pale in the morning sun, the gardens spread like a tapestry of order and color. Fountains playing, gravel paths crunching beneath the shoes of nobles hurrying to their appointments. From a distance, it is breathtaking. From within, it is suffocating. Life at Versailles was carefully choreographed. Every gesture, every word, every glance was watched, judged, remembered. Nobles lived not for comfort, but for access to the king, access to favor, access to survival within a court that glittered on the surface and strained beneath. And yet, Versailles was not only the story of nobles, it was also the story of servants rising before dawn, of artisans maintaining endless detail, of commoners far beyond the palace walls who bore the weight of a monarchy's extravagance. The splendor of Versailles was built on lives, both near and distant, both seen and unseen. Over the course of this journey, we will wander through the halls of the palace and the lives of those within it. We will look at daily routines, at figures remembered in history, at mysteries of architecture and culture. We will explore contrasts between nobility and ordinary life, between ritual and reality, between the brilliance of Versailles and the hardship hidden beneath. Through it all, our pace will be slow, our voice calm, our reflections steady. You need not strain to imagine it. Let the rhythm of this story carry you gently, as if walking step by step through the gravel paths of the gardens. So, settle in. The palace gates stand before you. The air is filled with the faint scent of clipped hedges and burning candles. The murmur of courtiers, the distant splash of fountains. Versailles awaits. Imagine the first light of morning touching the windows of Versailles. The palace is vast, its walls of pale stone catching the dawn. The air is cool, still scented with wax from the candles that burned through the night. Outside, the gardens are hushed, dew clinging to clipped hedges, fountains still waiting to spring to life. Inside, however, the palace is already stirring. Life here begins early, and it begins with ritual. The king must rise, and the act of waking is no private matter. Servants enter softly, their steps hushed on polished floors. Curtains are drawn back, light spills into the chamber. Courtiers gather, waiting their turn to assist in the smallest of gestures, handing the king his shirt, presenting his wig, fastening his shoes. Each step is an honor, each task a privilege. To serve in this way is to gain proximity, and proximity means influence. The air is thick with perfume, used to soften the odors of so many bodies in close quarters. The floors are lined with carpets and tapestries, their patterns muted by centuries of footsteps. Outside the king's chamber, the corridors grow crowded. Nobles whisper, their silks rustling as they shift from one foot to another, hoping to be seen, to be chosen, to be noticed. Meanwhile, in other parts of the palace, servants are already at work. Fires are being stoked, clothes brushed, dishes polished, kitchens come alive, the clatter of pots and pans echoing faintly through stone halls. Bread is baked in great ovens, the smell drifting upward. Water is hauled, wine decanted, tables laid. As the day unfolds, the palace fills with movement. Courtiers hurry through corridors, their heels striking against marble floors. Musicians tune instruments, their notes rising faintly, weaving into the background hum of voices. Pages carry messages, their small footsteps brisk. Everywhere there is motion, and everywhere there is hierarchy. Meals are not simple affairs. They are spectacles, attended not only by those eating, but by those watching. Imagine the long tables, gleaming with silver. Plates filled with elaborate dishes, roasts, seasoned with spice. Pastries shaped with care. Wines poured into crystal. The room is filled with candlelight, reflected in mirrors, multiplying the glow. Yet, for many nobles, eating is less about taste than about being seen, being present, being part of the ritual. Outside the dining halls, the gardens provide their own rhythm. Fountains spray arcs of water into the sunlight. Gravel crunches beneath the shoes of strolling courtiers. Sculptures line the paths, their pale stone softened by moss. The scent of flowers drifts from manicured beds, each bloom carefully chosen to suit the season. The gardens are not natural, but orchestrated just like life inside the palace. By evening, the air shifts, music fills the halls, dances begin. Chandeliers glow with countless candles, their flames reflected in the mirrors of the great gallery. Dresses shimmer, fans flutter, jewels glint in the light. The sound of violins, of laughter, of footsteps on polished floors carries through the night. For some, this is pleasure. For many, it is performance. And when the king retires, the ritual repeats itself in reverse. Curtains are drawn, clothes removed, prayers murmured, candles snuffed. Courtiers gather once more, watching, waiting, each moment an opportunity to gain favor. Only when the king sleeps does the palace finally quiet. Imagine yourself there, moving through a day at Versailles. The air perfumed, the floors crowded, the gardens ordered, the rituals endless. Life is dazzling, but it is also relentless. There is no privacy, no escape, no pause in the rhythm of display. This was daily life in the heart of the French monarchy. Magnificent, exhausting, and carefully choreographed from dawn to dusk. Imagine a boy of just 5 years old, crowned King of France. The year is 1643, and the child's name is Louis. He is too young to understand the weight of the crown placed upon his head, too young to imagine the decades of rule that stretch before him. Yet, in that moment, a life begins that would shape not only France, but the very image of monarchy itself. Louis XIV would come to be called the Sun King. The name was no accident. To him, the king was like the sun, the center of the universe, the source of light, the force around which everything revolved. His courtiers, his nobles, his people were the planets, circling his brilliance. This vision guided his reign, and nowhere was it more fully realized than at Versailles. As a young man, Louis saw the dangers of disorder. During his childhood, France was shaken by uprisings known as the Fronde, in which nobles challenged royal power. He never forgot the fear, the uncertainty, the feeling that authority could slip away. From then on, he was determined. The crown must be unchallenged, the monarchy unshakable. Imagine him as a young ruler, tall, poised, with a gaze trained carefully on those around him. He learned the art of ceremony, of presence, of silence that carried weight. He wore elaborate wigs, fine silks, and jewels, not merely for vanity, but as tools of rule. Appearance was power. To dazzle was to dominate. Versailles became his stage. What had once been a modest hunting lodge was transformed into a palace of astonishing scale and beauty. Imagine its great halls filled with mirrors that multiplied the glow of candlelight 1,000 times. Imagine gardens stretching outward, each tree, each fountain placed with mathematical precision, designed to impress both visitor and resident alike. Louis lived not in privacy, but in ritual. His waking, his dining, his prayers, his very movements were ceremonies, observed by courtiers eager for the honor of assisting. Even the simplest act, handing the king his gloves, holding his sleeve, offering a cup of wine, became a privilege, a sign of favor. In this way, he ensured that nobles were bound not by rebellion, but by dependence on his grace. His reign was long, over 70 years, one of the longest in European history. Under his rule, France became the center of culture, fashion, and art. Plays by music by Lully, architecture, painting, and literature flourished, all reflecting the brilliance of the Sun King. Yet behind the glow was burden. His wars drained the treasury, his taxes pressed heavily on the common people. His grandeur came at a cost carried far beyond Versailles. To live near him was privilege, but also suffocation. Nobles, who once roamed their own lands, were now tied to the court. Their lives dictated by etiquette, their independence slowly withering in exchange for access. Imagine Louis in his later years. His body is aged, his movements slowed, his face marked by time. And yet the rituals continue. The courtiers still gather, the ceremonies remain, the mirrors still reflect candlelight onto walls of gold. He had become the monarchy itself, inseparable from the palace, from the pageantry, from the weight of absolute rule. When he died in 1715, after more than 7 decades of reign, France was weary. The Sun King's brilliance had left shadows as well as light, but Versailles, his creation, endured. The palace remained the symbol of monarchy, the stage on which future rulers would struggle to uphold what he had built. Imagine standing in the Hall of Mirrors today, its glass gleaming with reflected light. In its silence, you can almost sense his presence still. A man who turned himself into the sun, and in doing so, shaped the rhythm of a nation. At first glance, Versailles seems a place of perfect order. The palace stands symmetrical, its gardens laid out with mathematical precision, its rooms arranged for beauty and display. Yet within its walls and beneath its design, mysteries linger, secrets both practical and symbolic. Imagine walking through the gilded corridors. The air smells faintly of wax and perfume, the polished floors reflecting the glow of chandeliers. On the surface, everything is grand, but behind the walls, hidden passageways wind through the palace, used by servants to move unseen, carrying food, messages, and supplies. These narrow corridors, dim and cramped, allowed the machinery of court life to function smoothly, while the nobles saw only brilliance. The palace was a stage, and every stage needs hidden spaces to keep its illusion alive. The architecture itself carries meaning. Louis XIV insisted that the palace reflect not only his wealth, but his vision of power. The design of the gardens was symbolic. The king at the center, like the sun, with every path radiating outward in careful order. Even the fountains had meaning, many dedicated to gods of classical mythology, reinforcing the image of the king as a figure of divine authority. Archaeologists and historians have studied these details for centuries. Beneath the palace, foundations reveal earlier layers. The modest hunting lodge that came before, the expansions that followed. In attics and storerooms, traces of daily life linger. Fragments of ceramics, discarded shoes, notes scribbled by servants. These are the quieter artifacts, the ones that tell us not only of kings but of cooks, cleaners, and craftsmen who sustained the palace's brilliance. There are also mysteries of sound and scent. Visitors described the constant hum of Versailles, footsteps echoing through marble halls, whispers of courtiers, the faint music of violins drifting from distant chambers, and the air was thick with perfume, used not only for fashion but to mask the odors of so many people in such close quarters. Candles burned everywhere, filling the rooms with waxy warmth. The palace was not silent, nor was it pristine. It was alive, bustling, layered with sensations. Even the gardens hold secrets. Beneath the carefully manicured hedges, pipes and channels carried water to feed the fountains. Workers labored constantly to maintain the illusion of effortless beauty, and hidden within the trees were groves. Small, enclosed spaces where music might be played, where private conversations might be held, where the ordered world of Versailles gave way to moments of intimacy. Imagine yourself wandering into one of these hidden groves. The gravel path crunches beneath your feet, the sound muffled by thick walls of greenery. Inside, a fountain trickles, the air cooler in the shade. Here, away from the grand halls, the palace feels almost human, almost quiet. Yet even these spaces were part of the performance, designed to delight and control, to offer beauty while reinforcing the power of the king. Versailles was, in many ways, a mystery machine. Every detail, from the mirrored halls to the hidden staircases, worked together to project an image of perfection while concealing the labor, the tension, and the exhaustion beneath. To walk its halls today is to see both sides, the dazzling surface and the secrets woven into its structure. And in these mysteries lies part of Versailles' enduring power. It was never just a palace. It was a world within a world, full of hidden meanings, whispered stories, and quiet spaces that balanced the grandeur on display. To understand Versailles, one must see not only its gold and mirrors, but also the people who filled its halls, and the countless others who lived far beyond its gates. Inside the palace, the nobility gathered, their lives bound by ritual and hierarchy. They rose early, their mornings spent waiting for glimpses of the king, their days structured around ceremonies, meals, and entertainments. For them, life was dazzling on the surface. Silks, jewels, music, gardens. Yet beneath the splendor was dependence. Nobles who had once ruled their own lands found themselves tethered to Versailles, their fortunes tied to proximity, their ambitions measured by the smallest signs of favor. Imagine a nobleman pacing the corridors, his wig powdered, his coat heavy with embroidery. He bows as the king passes, smiles as rivals watch, whispers carefully chosen words. Every gesture is calculated, every silence measured. To remain unseen is to fade into irrelevance. To make a mistake is to risk everything. Life here is not only comfort, it is constant performance. Beneath them, in the literal and figurative sense, were the servants. Thousands worked at Versailles, many unseen. They rose before dawn to light fires, polish floors, prepare meals, carry water, and maintain order in a palace of extraordinary scale. Their world was not gilded but practical. Narrow corridors, hidden stairways, cramped chambers. Theirs was the labor that sustained the illusion of effortless grandeur. Without them, the mirrors would not shine, the fountains would not flow, the ceremonies would falter. Imagine a servant carrying a tray of food along a hidden passage. The corridor is dim, the air close, footsteps echoing. At the other end lies a room of gold and candlelight, where nobles dine beneath chandeliers. The two worlds touch, but only briefly. The servant retreats, unseen, while the performance continues. And beyond Versailles, far across the countryside, lived the ordinary people of France. Farmers tending fields, bakers preparing bread, artisans working in workshops. Their lives were shaped not by court ritual, but by the demands of harvest, by hunger, by taxes levied to sustain the grandeur of Versailles. They did not see the palace daily, but they felt its weight. Each stone, each mirror, each fountain was paid for not only by nobles, but by the labor and coin of those who lived far away. Imagine a small village, its houses of timber and thatch, its fields stretching into the distance. A farmer bends over the soil, his back aching, his hands rough. He knows of the king, of the palace, but only distantly. His life is bound not by ceremony, but by seasons, by survival. Yet the taxes he pays, the grain he grows, the work he endures, all ripple outward, sustaining the brilliance of Versailles. The contrasts were sharp. For the nobility, Versailles was a cage of gold, dazzling but suffocating. For the servants, it was labor without rest, essential yet invisible. For the common people, it was distant, a symbol of power, but also a burden carried quietly, far from the palace gardens. Imagine standing on the terrace of Versailles at dusk. Behind you, the palace glows with candlelight. Before you, the gardens stretch outward, their paths straight, their hedges trimmed, their fountains shining. And beyond them, far into the horizon, lies the rest of France. Villages, farms, lives unseen from these windows, yet vital to everything within. In this way, Versailles was not only a palace, it was a mirror of society itself, reflecting grandeur at the top, labor beneath, and sacrifice beyond. In the glittering world of Versailles, women played roles both seen and unseen. Their presence shaped the rhythms of court life. Their influence could sway decisions, and yet their lives were bound by expectations as rigid as the palace walls. At the highest level stood the Queen. Imagine Queen Marie-Thérèse, wife of Louis XIV, moving through the great halls in heavy silks, jewels catching the candlelight. Her life was one of ritual, her every step observed. She presided over ceremonies, bore children, and upheld the image of royal dignity. Yet even as queen, her life was not her own. Marriages were political, alliances more important than affection. Her role was symbolic, her influence limited by the Sun King's overwhelming presence. Alongside queens stood royal mistresses, who often wielded power of a different kind. The most famous, Madame de Montespan, held sway at Louis XIV's court for many years. Imagine her chambers, richly adorned, filled with visitors seeking favor. Her beauty, wit, and presence gave her influence, but her position was never secure. Court whispers were constant, rivals many, and fortunes could shift with the king's changing heart. To be a mistress was to live in brilliance and in danger. Elevated one moment, vulnerable the next. For noble women, life at court was a constant negotiation. They dressed in elaborate gowns, their hair adorned with jewels and feathers. Their days filled with ceremonies, dances, and social maneuvering. But beneath the finery lay pressure. Every glance was noted, every word remembered. A misstep could mean exclusion, while a well-timed smile could open doors. Women's influence often moved quietly, through networks of conversation, through the subtle art of favor and alliance. Imagine a lady-in-waiting, following the queen through the mirrored halls. Her dress rustles softly as she walks, her hands folded neatly. She listens carefully, observes keenly, knowing that information is currency. To be trusted is to hold power. To be excluded is to fade into irrelevance. And beyond the noble chambers were the women of service. Maids, laundresses, seamstresses, cooks. Thousands of women labored within Versailles, their work essential but rarely acknowledged. They stitched gowns of silk, scrubbed marble floors, prepared endless meals, and carried water through hidden corridors. Their presence was constant, though often unseen, part of the machinery that kept the palace alive. Women at Versailles also carried unique burdens. Expectations of beauty, of obedience, of fertility weighed heavily. A woman's value was often measured by her appearance, her alliances, her ability to bear heirs. And yet, within these confines, women found ways to shape their lives. Some became patrons of the arts, supporting music, theatre, and literature. Others navigated politics with subtlety, influencing decisions through charm and persuasion. Imagine a ballroom at night, filled with music and light. Women move gracefully across polished floors, their gowns shimmering, their fans flicking open and closed like signals in the air. To the eye, it is beauty. To the heart, it is strategy. Each smile, each word, each glance carries weight. For women of the lower classes, far from these halls, life was harder still. Peasant women worked the fields, tended families, endured hunger and hardship. They did not see the gold of Versailles, yet they bore its cost in taxes and labor. Their lives were a world apart from the nobles, yet connected by the same kingdom, the same crown. The role of women at Versailles was therefore both dazzling and constrained. They shaped the court's atmosphere, influenced its culture, and sustained its rituals. Yet they lived always under scrutiny, their power fragile, their security uncertain. Imagine, then, standing in the Hall of Mirrors, surrounded by reflections of silks and jewels. Behind every reflection lies a life of privilege, of burden, of quiet strength in a world where every move was watched, and every choice carried consequence. At Versailles, life was a performance. Every day unfolded as if upon a stage, with the king as its center, and the courtiers as both actors and audience. To survive here was not only to live, but to perform endlessly, within rules that were both rigid and unspoken. The most famous of these rituals was the lever, the king's rising. Imagine the chamber of Louis XIV at dawn. The air is cool, the curtains drawn back to let in the first light. Courtiers gather at the foot of his bed, their wigs powdered, their coats embroidered. Servants stand ready, their hands full of garments. The king stirs, and the ritual begins. Each gesture is choreographed. The privilege of handing him his shirt, of fastening his shoe, of presenting his wig, these were honors, granted only to those favored by rank or fortune. To be present at the lever was to be seen by the king, to be part of his orbit. Those excluded felt the chill of distance. The couture, the king's retiring at night, was just as ceremonial. Courtiers again gathered to watch him undress, to witness the closing of the day. Even sleep was not private. The king's life belonged to the stage, his body a symbol, his actions a spectacle. Meals, too, were performances. At the Grand Caviar, the king dined before an audience of nobles. Imagine him seated at a long table, dishes of roasts, pastries, and fruits set before him. Candles flicker in silver holders, music plays softly in the background. Yet the act of eating is not private nourishment. It is ritual. Courtiers watch, bow, whisper, their eyes fixed upon him. Even the simplest gesture, a sip of wine, a bite of bread, becomes significant. Etiquette extended to every corner of court life. Bowing, speaking, even standing in the king's presence, followed rules. Nobles studied these codes endlessly, for a mistake could mean humiliation, and humiliation could mean exclusion. To sit when one should stand, to speak when one should bow, to smile at the wrong moment. Each error was remembered, whispered about, and repeated. Imagine walking through the hall of mirrors. Your reflection multiplied 100 times. You adjust your posture, smooth your sleeve, choose your words carefully. You know that eyes are always upon you, ears always listening. Every moment at Versailles is a test. Even clothing was a form of ceremony. Nobles spent fortunes on gowns, wigs, and jewels, not only to display wealth, but to obey unspoken expectations. A dress too plain suggested poverty. A coat too simple suggested neglect. Fashion was not freedom, but obligation, another form of performance demanded by the court. And yet, for all its glitter, etiquette was also suffocating. Imagine living each day without privacy, without pause, every action judged, every silence noted. To survive at Versailles was to surrender individuality, to move always within the rhythm of ritual, to bow not only with the body, but with the spirit. For us today, accustomed to privacy, comfort, and choice, such a life would be difficult to endure. Imagine waking and sleeping under watchful eyes, eating as others observed, walking only within prescribed rules. At first, it may seem dazzling, but soon it would be exhausting, a performance without end. Versailles was not simply a palace. It was a stage, and to live upon it was to act endlessly until the curtain never closed. From a distance, Versailles seemed a place of endless feasting. Great banquets glittered beneath chandeliers. Tables stretched long with silver dishes, and the aromas of roasts, pastries, and sweet wines filled the air. But when we look closer, the world of food and health at Versailles was not only indulgence, it was also burden, ritual, and at times hardship. Meals at court were divided by ceremony. The most famous was the Grand Caviar, where the king dined in public. Imagine Louis XIV seated at a long table, dishes brought forth in procession. Roasted meats, delicate pastries, spiced sauces, fruits, and custards. Servants carried silver trays, their footsteps echoing softly across marble floors. Courtiers stood nearby, silent and attentive, their eyes fixed not upon the food itself, but upon the king's every gesture. For the king, eating was performance as much as nourishment. Each sip of wine, each piece of bread was observed, a symbol of his majesty. For the courtiers, to dine near him, or even to witness his dining, was privilege. Yet much of this food was not eaten. Dishes piled high for display, carried away uneaten, replaced by the next course. The abundance was as much for show as for sustenance. Noble families within Versailles also dined richly, but not without cost. To maintain one's status at court, clothing, jewels, and meals all had to match the splendor expected. Banquets were expensive, and many nobles, though glittering at Versailles, were deeply in debt. Behind their silks and smiles, financial hardship gnawed quietly. Health at Versailles was another hidden struggle. The palace, though magnificent, was crowded. Thousands lived within its walls. Nobles, servants, guards, musicians, and workers. Imagine the hallways, filled with footsteps, the air heavy with candle smoke and perfume. Ventilation was poor, and disease could spread quickly. Illness did not spare kings or queens. Medical knowledge was limited. Physicians prescribed bloodletting, purges, or herbal remedies. Imagine a courtier sitting in his chamber, pale and weary, as a physician applies leeches in hopes of restoring balance. The remedies were often harsh, sometimes harmful, yet they reflected the best knowledge of the time. Hygiene, too, was a quiet hardship. Versailles lacked proper sanitation in its early years. Though fountains sparkled in the gardens, water was not always clean. Perfume was used generously, not only for fashion but to mask less pleasant odors. Imagine walking through the corridors, the air thick with roses, lavender, and musk, a sweetness that covered the realities of so many bodies living in close quarters. Even food itself could be a source of illness. Without refrigeration, meats and sauces spoiled easily. Spices and salt were used not only for flavor but to preserve. For courtiers accustomed to constant display, indigestion and stomach troubles were common companions. And yet, amidst these difficulties, life went on. The banquets continued, the rituals unfolded, the perfumes drifted. Health was fragile, but ceremony endured. Imagine now sitting quietly at a corner of the Hall of Mirrors after a great feast. The candles burn low, the air still warm with the scent of food and wax. Servants clear the remnants of silver dishes, their footsteps soft against the marble. The splendor lingers, but beneath it you sense the strain, the exhaustion of servants, the debts of nobles, the frailty of bodies in a place that demanded endless brilliance. For us today, with our understanding of medicine, nutrition, and hygiene, such a world would be difficult to endure. Beneath its beauty, Versailles carried hidden hardships, reminders that even in the most dazzling of palaces, life was fragile, and survival not as effortless as it appeared. Versailles was not only a palace of ritual and politics, it was also a palace of spectacle, where music and performance filled the days and nights with rhythm and light. For the courtiers, entertainment was both pleasure and obligation, a way to display refinement, to be seen and to remain within the orbit of the king. Music was everywhere. Imagine walking through the marble corridors and hearing the faint sound of violins drifting from a distant chamber. At court, musicians were constantly employed to provide a steady background of sound. For meals, for ceremonies, for private gatherings, the air was never silent. The palace itself seemed to hum with melody. Louis XIV himself adored music and dance. As a young man, he often performed in ballets, dressed in elaborate costumes, his movements graceful, his presence commanding. It was in one such role, as the sun, that he began to be called the Sun King. Imagine the spectacle. The young king at the center of the stage, his body lit by candlelight, golden rays adorning his costume, courtiers watching in awe. Through dance, he became not only ruler but symbol. The sun itself. Opera, too, flourished at Versailles. Entire productions were staged in the palace theatres, complete with elaborate sets, costumes, and orchestras. The air filled with voices rising in song, with instruments blending in harmony. These performances dazzled, but they also carried messages, stories of gods, of kings, of order and triumph that mirrored the grandeur of the monarchy. The gardens themselves became stages. Imagine summer evenings when fountains sprayed in time with music, fireworks lit the sky, and actors performed in open-air theatres hidden within groves. Courtiers strolled along gravel paths, their gowns and coats glowing in torchlight. The air alive with laughter, music, and the scent of blooming flowers. The entire palace became a place of constant performance, where nature itself was drawn into the spectacle. But entertainment was not only joy, it was also a form of control. By dazzling the nobility with endless feasts, ballets, and concerts, Louis XIV kept them near him, their energy spent on performance rather than rebellion. Leisure became obligation. Attendance was expected, participation required. To miss an event was to risk exclusion, and exclusion meant loss of favor. Imagine a courtier, weary after a long day of ceremonies, stepping once more into a ballroom lit by hundreds of candles. Music swells, dancers move across the polished floor, jewels glitter in every direction. The courtier smiles, bows, speaks politely, though his heart longs for rest. For at Versailles, even pleasure could be exhausting. Yet there is no denying the beauty. The violins, the voices, the movement of dance, the glow of fireworks above mirrored waters, all created moments that lingered in memory. For those who lived there, the palace was not only a place of burden but also of wonder, a world of sights and sounds that few elsewhere could imagine. And so, entertainment at Versailles was both escape and enclosure. It offered joy, music, and spectacle, but always in the service of power. Each note played, each dance performed, each firework lit the sky not only for delight, but to remind all who watched that the brilliance of Versailles, like the sun, radiated from its king. When you first approach Versailles, it is easy to be overwhelmed by its sheer size. The facade stretches wide across the horizon, a seemingly endless line of stone and glass, balanced in perfect symmetry. But Versailles was never meant to be simply a home. It was a statement of power, of order, of the monarchy's place in the universe. The palace began as a modest hunting lodge, built by Louis XIII, surrounded by woods and fields. When Louis XIV inherited it, he transformed it into something unlike anything the world had ever seen. Each stone laid, each window placed, each garden planted was chosen not only for beauty but for meaning. The architecture reflects the idea of absolute monarchy. Everything radiates from the king. The palace itself is oriented so that the rising sun lights the king's bedroom. A reminder that, like the sun, his presence marked the beginning of the day. From his chamber, the design spreads outward, the rooms arranged in careful order, the halls leading always toward him, as if every space was drawn into his orbit. The gardens, too, reflect this vision. Imagine walking along the gravel paths, their lines straight and precise, the hedges trimmed into perfect shapes. Fountains sparkle, their waters flowing through underground channels carefully engineered to maintain constant display. Statues of gods and heroes line the walkways. Apollo, the sun god, placed prominently, reinforcing the image of the king himself as the son of France. Nothing here is wild or accidental. The natural world is tamed, ordered, shaped into symmetry. Even the trees stand in neat rows, trimmed to uniform height. To walk in the gardens is to walk in a world remade by human will, a reflection of the king's command over not only people, but nature itself. Inside, the symbolism continues. The Hall of Mirrors is perhaps the most famous space in the palace. Imagine standing there, 17 tall windows open to the gardens, their light reflected by 17 opposite mirrors, multiplying brilliance into infinity. Crystal chandeliers hang from the ceiling, their candles doubling and redoubling in every reflection. Above, gilded paintings tell stories of France's victories. Louis at their center, his image immortalized in art. To stand in this hall was to feel the power of France. Dazzling, endless, inescapable. Other rooms carry subtler messages. The salons dedicated to planets and gods. Mars, Venus, Mercury, placed Louis at the center of a cosmic order. The monarchy aligned with heaven itself. Even the smallest details, the carvings, the tapestries, the ceilings painted with myths, reinforced the idea that the king's rule was not only earthly but divine. Yet beneath this grandeur was also practicality. Hidden corridors allowed servants to move unseen. maintaining the illusion of effortless beauty. The sheer scale required constant repair, constant labor, an invisible army ensuring the palace's perfection. Imagine yourself walking through Versailles at dusk. The marble floors glow faintly in the fading light. The mirrors catch the last rays of sun. The gardens stretch outward into shadow. Every line, every stone, every tree feels deliberate, as though placed not only to please the eye, but to remind you of the order imposed by the monarchy. For us today, accustomed to individuality, such symmetry might feel rigid, almost unnatural. But for those who lived in the time of Louis XIV, this order was awe-inspiring. The very design of Versailles communicated what words alone could not: that the king was the sun, the source of light, and that all life at court and beyond revolved around him. Versailles shone with gold, mirrors, music, and ceremony. But behind its brilliance lay a weight carried by many, a cost that reached far beyond its gardens. The construction itself was immense. Imagine the thousands of laborers, craftsmen, and artists who toiled for years to expand the hunting lodge into a palace of marble and gilt. Stone was quarried, timber hauled, fountains engineered, ceilings painted with vast frescoes. Each detail required not only skill, but also coin. Vast sums flowing from the royal treasury into this vision of grandeur. For the monarchy, Versailles was a tool of power, worth every expense. But for the common people of France, those expenses became taxes. Farmers in distant villages, artisans in crowded towns, merchants in marketplaces, all bore the burden. The harvest they gathered, the bread they baked, the goods they sold, a portion of it flowed toward Versailles, where it was transformed into chandeliers, mirrors, silks, and fountains. Imagine a farmer at dawn, bent over his field. The soil is damp, the work hard, his family weary. He knows of the palace distantly, spoken of in whispers, described in stories. He may never see its marble halls or golden gates, yet part of his labor sustains it. The splendor of Versailles was built not only by artisans who carved its walls, but by countless unseen hands that fed the kingdom. Even within the palace, there were hidden burdens. Nobles dazzled in silks and jewels, but many fell deep into debt. To maintain appearances at court was costly. Gowns had to be new, jewels impressive, banquets lavish. To fall behind was to risk humiliation, and so many borrowed heavily, their wealth a glittering illusion, their lives shadowed by financial strain. Servants to bore weight. Thousands worked tirelessly, their labor largely invisible. Imagine a laundress carrying bundles of linen through the corridors, her arms heavy, her back aching. Imagine a cook rising before dawn, sweating in the vast kitchens as great ovens roared. Imagine a gardener trimming endless hedges, his hands rough, his labor never finished. Their efforts maintained the illusion of ease, though for them life was anything but. The palace itself was expensive to maintain. Candles burned by the thousands each night, filling chandeliers and sconces with light. Fountains required constant care, their elaborate systems prone to failure. Food had to be brought in daily, carriages rolling endlessly across roads from Paris to Versailles. Behind the beauty lay an endless stream of labor, expense, and sacrifice. And while the palace glittered, the kingdom outside often struggled. Famines came, winters froze, harvests failed. Disease spread through villages, lives were cut short. To those far from Versailles, the palace was both a marvel and a symbol of distance, of wealth concentrated, of burdens borne unevenly. Imagine standing on the edge of the gardens, looking outward. Behind you, marble glows and fountains sparkle. Before you, beyond the horizon, lie fields and villages where life is hard, where families rise before dawn and sleep weary at night. The contrast is stark. Versailles dazzled the world, but its brilliance cast long shadows. For us today, accustomed to seeing palaces as places of history, it is easy to forget the cost of their creation. Versailles was not only a monument to beauty, it was also a monument to burden, to the countless lives that sustained its shine, often at great sacrifice. Versailles was never meant to be seen only by the French nobility. It was also built for the eyes of the world. Every hall, every mirror, every fountain was designed not only to dazzle those within, but to send a message to those who came from beyond, that France was powerful, ordered, and radiant under its king. Imagine an ambassador arriving at Versailles after a long journey across Europe. His carriage rolls through the gates, wheels crunching against gravel, the air thick with the scent of clipped hedges and burning torches. Before him rises the palace, immense, symmetrical, gleaming in the sunlight. Already the message is clear. This is no ordinary court, but the center of power, a place designed to inspire awe. Inside, the visitor is led through halls lined with gilded carvings, ceilings painted with scenes of triumph, mirrors multiplying light into infinity. Courtiers bow as he passes, their silks rustling softly, their wigs powdered white. The air smells faintly of wax, of perfume, of flowers carried in from the gardens. At every step, the ambassador feels himself not in a home, but in a theatre. And the king, its leading role. The ceremonies of reception were elaborate. Ambassadors from Spain, England, the Ottoman Empire, and beyond were met with processions, music, and carefully orchestrated audiences. Louis XIV understood that every detail mattered, to delay an ambassador, to seat him lower, to assign him fewer courtiers. These were not small gestures, but messages, symbols of status and rank. Diplomacy at Versailles was as much performance as it was conversation. Imagine the hall of mirrors prepared for such a meeting. Candles glow in crystal chandeliers, their flames multiplied endlessly in glass. The marble floors reflect the shimmer of gold. At one end of the hall stands the king, his presence magnified by costume, by ceremony, by silence. The ambassador bows, speaks, gestures, yet he is always aware that he is the guest, and Versailles the stage upon which he plays a minor role. Even the gardens served diplomacy. Strolling through their ordered paths, courtiers and visitors saw not only beauty, but symbolism. Nature itself seemed to obey the will of the king. Fountains leaped in time with music, statues told stories of gods and heroes, all reinforcing the image of a ruler whose power was absolute, his court unmatched. For foreign rulers, the effect was lasting. Versailles became the model for courts across Europe. In Austria, Prussia, and Russia, palaces were built in imitation, each seeking to capture something of its grandeur. To visit Versailles was to see the future of monarchy, the standard by which all others were judged. Yet behind the display lay the same burdens, the same exhaustion, the same hidden costs. The ambassadors did not see the debts of nobles, the weary hands of servants, the hunger of villagers beyond the gates. They saw only the illusion, carefully crafted, endlessly maintained, a vision of France as dazzling, unshakable, eternal. Imagine yourself as one of those visitors, standing in the hall of mirrors, your reflection stretching outward into endless glass. The music swells, the courtiers bow, the king stands radiant. In that moment, it is easy to believe the illusion, to feel that you are at the very center of the world. Versailles was not only a palace, it was a stage, and for centuries its performance shaped the way Europe saw France. For decades, Versailles dazzled. It was the jewel of the French monarchy, the shining stage upon which kings played their role as absolute rulers. Yet, as time passed, the brilliance began to cast longer shadows. What had once been admired by all slowly became resented, a symbol not of unity but of excess. Imagine the palace in the mid-18th century under Louis XV. The mirrors still gleamed, the fountains still flowed, the rituals still unfolded as they had under Louis XIV. Yet, outside the palace walls, the kingdom grew restless. Famines spread, taxes rose, wars drained the treasury. For the ordinary people of France, Versailles no longer shone as a beacon of greatness. It loomed instead as a burden, its brilliance purchased with their hunger. Louis XV himself lacked the commanding presence of his great-grandfather. Where Louis XIV had been the son, Louis XV seemed distant, uncertain. He preferred private pleasures, surrounding himself with mistresses such as Madame de Pompadour, whose beauty and influence stirred admiration in some, resentment in others. Court life continued, but the stage lost some of its force. By the time Louis XVI inherited the throne, change was in the air. The Enlightenment had spread across Europe, its thinkers questioning monarchy, tradition, and privilege. Philosophers spoke of liberty, equality, and reason. Books carried ideas into salons, and where they were whispered, debated, and believed. Versailles, with its rigid rituals and endless display, seemed increasingly out of step with the world beyond. Imagine an ordinary Parisian in the late 1700s standing before a bakery with empty shelves. Hunger gnaws, frustration grows. In the distance, he knows of Versailles, of its banquets and golden halls. The contrast sharpens anger. The palace becomes not a symbol of France's glory, but of its distance from the lives of ordinary people. Marie Antoinette, Queen to Louis XVI, became the focus of much resentment. Though her life was bound by the same etiquette and obligations as others at Versailles, she was accused of extravagance, of indifference to suffering. Tales spread, some true, many exaggerated, of her gowns, her jewels, her amusements at the Petit Trianon, her private retreat within the palace grounds. Imagine her small theatre at Versailles, where she and her friends performed plays in rustic costume. To her, it was an escape from the rigid formality of court. To her critics, it was mockery, a queen pretending at simplicity while her people starved. The symbolism of Versailles, once a tool of power, began to work against the monarchy. What had once inspired awe now inspired resentment. The palace became the embodiment of excess, of waste, of rulers out of touch with their people. When the revolution came in 1789, the storm did not begin within Versailles, but it soon arrived there. Crowds marched to the palace, demanding bread, demanding change. Imagine the noise of thousands outside the gilded gates, their voices rising like a tide against the marble walls. Inside, courtiers whispered, nobles trembled, the rituals suddenly felt fragile. The stage of absolute monarchy was collapsing. Versailles would never again be what it had been. Its mirrors still reflected light, its gardens still stretched outward, but the illusion was broken. The palace, once the sun of France, had become the shadow of its downfall. When Versailles ceased to be the living heart of monarchy, its story did not end. The palace remained vast and immovable, its stones holding memories of splendor, of ritual, of collapse. Across centuries, it transformed from stage of power to museum of history, to a monument that belongs not only to France, but to the world. After the royal family was taken from Versailles in 1789, the palace grew quiet. Imagine the grand halls, once filled with courtiers, now standing empty. The chandeliers dark, the mirrors reflecting only silence, the gardens untended, fountains stilled. Servants drifted away, nobles no longer pressed through its corridors. The palace that had thrived on ceremony and display stood as a hollow shell of what it had been. During the Revolution, many of its treasures were removed. Tapestries were taken down, furniture sold, jewels scattered. Paintings were relocated, statues removed from their pedestals, yet the walls, the mirrors, the vast marble floors remained too large to be dismantled, too deeply tied to France's identity to vanish entirely. Versailles, stripped of its monarchy, endured as a ghost of itself. By the 19th century, new meaning was given to its spaces. King Louis Philippe declared that Versailles would become a museum dedicated to the history of France. The Palace of Kings became a palace of memory. Halls once reserved for nobility now displayed vast paintings of battles, portraits of leaders, and relics of the nation's past. Visitors came not to seek favor from a king, but to walk through history, to see France's triumphs and tragedies told upon its walls. Imagine yourself wandering these galleries in the 19th century. The silence is different now. Not the hush of ceremony, but the quiet of reflection. You pause before a vast painting of soldiers in battle, the canvas stretching from floor to ceiling. You walk on through corridors once echoing with courtiers, now filled with the steps of ordinary visitors. Versailles no longer belongs to the few. It belongs to all. Through the centuries that followed, Versailles became not only a museum, but also a stage for history once more. In 1919, after the First World War, world leaders gathered in the Hall of Mirrors to sign the Treaty of Versailles. Imagine the scene. The chandeliers lit, the mirrors gleaming, diplomats seated at long tables, pens scratching across paper. The hall that had once celebrated Louis XIV now bore witness to a new order in Europe. The Palace of Monarchy became the Palace of Diplomacy, its symbolism reshaped yet again. Even today, Versailles continues to hold layers of meaning. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, preserved not only for its beauty, but for what it represents. Millions visit each year, their footsteps echoing across marble floors, their reflections multiplying endlessly in the mirrors. Children peer up at ceilings, painted with gods and heroes. Families stroll the gardens where fountains leap. Scholars trace the details of architecture, and travelers pause to take in the sheer scale of its design. And yet, beneath the crowds, Versailles still whispers of its past. In the Hall of Mirrors, you can almost hear the rustle of silk gowns, the murmur of courtiers waiting for the king to pass. In the Queen's bedchamber, you can almost sense Marie Antoinette, rising reluctantly to face the endless demands of ceremony. In the gardens, beneath the ordered hedges and sculpted trees, you can still imagine Louis XIV strolling as the center of his own universe. Versailles has also become part of culture, woven into stories, films, novels, and art. Its name is synonymous with grandeur, with opulence, with monarchy at its most brilliant and its most fragile. To say Versailles is to summon images of golden gates, mirrored halls, and the elegance of a world both dazzling and exhausting. And yet, its memory carries lessons. Versailles is admired, but also questioned. It is a reminder of what power can build, but also of what burden it imposes. It is a monument not only to kings and queens, but to the countless workers, servants, and common people who sustained it, often unseen, often unremembered. Imagine standing in the gardens at dusk. The palace rises behind you, glowing faintly in the last light of day. The fountains fall silent, the gravel paths stretch outward into shadow. Around you, visitors have gone, and the air is still. In that quiet, you feel the weight of centuries. Versailles is not only stone and glass, it is memory of splendor, of power, of downfall, of endurance. This is its legacy. Not just a palace of kings, but a mirror of history itself, reflecting beauty and burden, brilliance and fragility. A place where the past is preserved in every wall, every mirror, every carefully ordered tree. And as you imagine it now, across distance and time, Versailles is no longer only theirs. It is yours as well, a story to carry, a memory to hold, a reminder of how power shines and how it fades. Versailles dazzles us even now. Its mirrors, its gardens, its gilded halls inspire wonder. But if we pause to imagine ourselves truly living there, we begin to understand why survival in such a world would have been difficult, perhaps impossible for most of us today. Imagine again the rhythm of life at Versailles. The day begins, not in private quiet, but in ceremony. A king does not wake alone. He wakes surrounded by courtiers, their eyes upon his every gesture. Meals are not moments of nourishment, but performances for an audience. Walks in the garden are not leisurely strolls, but carefully measured opportunities to be seen. Life here is never one's own. Every word, every smile, every silence is weighed, remembered, judged. For us, accustomed to privacy, such constant visibility would feel suffocating. We rise in the morning in solitude, eat without audience, walk without performance. At Versailles, there was no solitude. To survive in its world meant to live always as actor upon a stage that never dimmed its lights. The physical burdens would weigh on us, too. Imagine the endless heavy clothing, wigs powdered and elaborate, shoes stiff with fashion. Imagine carrying debt to maintain appearances, spending fortunes on gowns or jewels simply to remain respectable. For us, accustomed to comfort and ease, such obligations would be wearying. Even the beauty of Versailles carried hardship. The air was thick with perfume, not only for elegance, but to cover the odors of crowded rooms. Candles smoked, filling the halls with wax and soot. Disease spread easily through the palace. Medicine offered little relief. Imagine living within walls that sparkled with gold, yet hiding realities of illness, fatigue, and strain. And beyond the palace, life was harder still. The common people of France carried the burden of its splendor, their harvests taxed, their bread scarce, their winters cold. For them, Versailles was not only distant, but heavy, a reminder of the divide between their hardship and the palace's brilliance. To imagine ourselves in their place is to feel hunger, labor, and obligation pressing daily upon us. The contrast with our present lives is striking. Today, most of us wake when we choose, eat in comfort, dress for ease. We can step outside without fear of judgment, speak without fear of exclusion, live without fear that a single misstep in etiquette might end our prospects forever. Where their world demanded endless display, ours allows quiet individuality and rest. And yet, in reflection, we may also feel gratitude. For though we admire the beauty of Versailles, we know we do not need to live as they did to find meaning. Our comforts, warm rooms, private meals, medicine, freedom, are gifts that those at Versailles, whether noble or servant, would have envied. Imagine yourself lying now where you are, in stillness, in safety. Around you is privacy, comfort, peace. You are not watched, not judged, not bound by ceremony. You are free in ways that those at Versailles never could be. And so, Versailles offers us two things: wonder and perspective. Wonder in its brilliance, its mirrors, its gardens that still enchant. Perspective in its burdens, reminding us how far we have come How fortunate we are to live in a world of ease, choice, and rest. If we tried to survive at Versailles, most of us could not. But, in imagining it, we find comfort in the lives we lead now. Lives that are simple, private, and free from the endless performance of Monarchy's stage. Imagine once more the Palace of Versailles, but now it is evening. The sun has sunk low, its last light spilling across the gardens, painting the fountains with a soft golden glow. The gravel paths, so crowded during the day, grow quiet. The air cools, carrying with it the faint scent of clipped hedges and lingering smoke from torches being lit. Inside, the chandeliers are bright with hundreds of candles, their flames reflected endlessly in the mirrors. Music drifts through the halls, a gentle hum of strings and voices, softened now as the day winds down. Courtiers move slowly, their silks rustling like whispers, their voices lowered as the hours grow late. The performance of the day begins to fade, though never fully. Step into the Hall of Mirrors at this hour. The mirrors reflect the last traces of daylight, mingled with the warm glow of candles. Your footsteps echo on the marble floor, the sound stretching into silence. The hall, so often crowded, feels hushed, almost timeless. You pause, and for a moment you can imagine every life that passed here. The kings, the queens, the courtiers, the ambassadors, the revolutionaries, the visitors of today. All their footsteps, all their whispers, linger faintly in the glass. Now walk out onto the terrace where the palace opens to the gardens. The fountains murmur softly, their waters catching starlight. The hedges rise in dark ordered lines. The statues of gods and heroes stand silent in the shadows. The vastness of the gardens stretches outward into the night, endless, symmetrical, serene. You breathe deeply. The air is cool, still. The sounds of the palace fade behind you. The music, the whispers, the clatter of servants clearing dishes. Ahead, only quiet. Above, the stars gleam, steady and eternal, as they did centuries ago when courtiers stood here, gazing upward at the same night sky. Imagine standing in this stillness, alone now, the palace at your back, the gardens before you. The grandeur no longer dazzles, the burdens no longer weigh. What remains is only calm, the calm of stone, of water, of night. And as you linger in this scene, the palace slowly begins to dissolve. The mirrors fade, the gardens soften, the candles flicker out one by one. What remains is only the rhythm of your breath, the quiet of your room, the safety of the present. You are not at Versailles. You are here now, in comfort, in stillness. You are not watched, not judged, not burdened by ritual. You are free to rest, to close your eyes, to let sleep come gently. The palace fades into memory. The night deepens. Around you, calm settles like a soft blanket. Versailles has vanished into history, and you remain safe in the quiet of your own world. And so, our journey through the world of the French monarchy and the Palace of Versailles comes to an end. We have walked through its gilded halls and mirrored galleries. We have stood among courtiers in silks and servants in hidden corridors. We have watched kings rise in ceremony and queens endure endless scrutiny. We have seen gardens where fountains leaped into the sky, and we have felt the weight of taxes, debts, and hunger that lay far beyond the palace gates. We have traced the arc of Versailles from its rise under the Sun King to its decline in the shadows of revolution. We have seen how it endured as memory, a museum, a monument, a mirror of history. And we have reflected on its legacy, what it means for us today, and why survival in such a world of spectacle and burden would be nearly impossible for most of us. Versailles was dazzling, but also suffocating. Beautiful, but costly. A world of endless performance, where every gesture was judged, every silence remembered, every life constrained by ritual. For us, living now in comfort and privacy, it would be hard to endure even a single day in its rigid rhythm. And yet, in imagining it, we find both wonder and gratitude. Wonder in its beauty and history. Gratitude in our own lives. Lives of warmth, safety, freedom, and quiet. As you lie here now, let that reflection settle softly. You are not in Versailles. You are not burdened by ceremony or weighed down by debt. You are here, in your own time, in your own space, surrounded by calm. The palace fades. The candles are snuffed. The mirrors go dark. What remains is only the quiet of your breath, the stillness of night, and the safety of rest. And as this story closes, gentle music will follow. Soft, steady, unhurried, like a tide carrying you deeper into stillness. Let it wash over you, easing you further into calm, until sleep comes, quietly, peacefully, fully. You have walked through Versailles. You have left it behind. And now, it is time to rest. Welcome. Before we begin tonight's journey, take a moment to settle into stillness. Notice where you are listening from. Perhaps you are at home, lying in bed, or perhaps in a quiet space somewhere else. What time is it where you are? Is it deep into the night, the hours stretching silently before dawn? Or is it evening, the last of the day's light fading into rest? Wherever you are, and whatever the hour, this time belongs to you. Tonight, we step into a world of grandeur and unease, of glittering courts and hidden burdens. The French monarchy, and most vividly, the Palace of Versailles. When we think of Versailles, we imagine golden halls, shimmering mirrors, gardens stretching endlessly, and the rustle of silks as courtiers bow before their king. But beneath the beauty, beneath the pageantry, lay a life that was rigid, exhausting, and filled with constant scrutiny. It was a world that dazzled the eye, but demanded endless sacrifice from those within it. Imagine yourself approaching Versailles in the 17th century. The palace rises before you, vast and symmetrical, its stone walls glowing pale in the morning sun. The gardens spread like a tapestry of order and color. Fountains playing, gravel paths crunching beneath the shoes of nobles hurrying to their appointments. From a distance, it is breathtaking. From within, it is suffocating. Life at Versailles was carefully choreographed. Every gesture, every word, every glance was watched, judged, remembered. Nobles lived not for comfort, but for access to the king, access to favor, access to survival within a court that glittered on the surface and strained beneath. And yet, Versailles was not only the story of nobles, it was also the story of servants rising before dawn, of artisans maintaining endless detail, of commoners far beyond the palace walls who bore the weight of a monarchy's extravagance. The splendor of Versailles was built on lives, both near and distant, both seen and unseen. Over the course of this journey, we will wander through the halls of the palace and the lives of those within it. We will look at daily routines, at figures remembered in history, at mysteries of architecture and culture. We will explore contrasts between nobility and ordinary life, between ritual and reality, between the brilliance of Versailles and the hardship hidden beneath. Through it all, our pace will be slow, our voice calm, our reflections steady. You need not strain to imagine it. Let the rhythm of this story carry you gently, as if walking step by step through the gravel paths of the gardens. So, settle in. The palace gates stand before you. The air is filled with the faint scent of clipped hedges and burning candles. The murmur of courtiers, the distant splash of fountains. Versailles awaits.